Part 1, The River's Call. The sun hung low over the Tennessee hills, casting a fiery glow across the Cumberland River as it wound lazily through the valley. The water shimmered like molten gold, reflecting the dense pines and jagged cliffs that framed the riverbank. It was a crisp Saturday morning in late October, and a handful of fishermen had gathered at their usual spot, a quiet stretch near the town of Clarksville where the fish bit hard and the world felt far away. Rods dipped into the glassy surface, tackle boxes clinked softly, and the air carried the faint tang of bait and river mud. It was a routine day, the kind of peaceful escape these men lived for, until the barking started. A scruffy black and tan hound appeared out of nowhere, his fur matted with burrs and his ribs faintly visible beneath a coat caked in dirt. He stood at the water's edge, his barks sharp and relentless, cutting through the stillness like a siren. His eyes, wild, amber, and unyielding, were fixed on the river, his paws splashing in the shallows as he darted back and forth. "Get lost!" "Mutt," hollered Jim Tanner, a grizzled fisherman with a salt and pepper beard, tossing a small stone in the dog's direction. The pebble skipped across the water, but the hound didn't flinch. Instead, he barked louder, his tail stiff, his body trembling with urgency. "Damn dog's gonna scare off every fish from here to Nashville," grumbled Pete Walsh, a wiry man in his 30s with a sunburned neck, reeling in his line with an irritated yank. The other fishermen muttered agreement, their patience thinning as the barking grew more frantic. But the dog wasn't deterred, he howled. A piercing, pleading sound that sent a flock of crows scattering from the treetops, their caws echoing over the river. "What's his deal?" asked Tommy Reed, the youngest of the group at 25. His curiosity outweighing his annoyance. He set his rod down and squinted at the hound, who was now digging furiously at the muddy bank, his claws flinging wet earth into the air. "He's actin' like somethin's wrong," Jim scoffed, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool air. "Dogs bark at anything, squirrels, shadows, their own damn tails. Probably just a stray lookin' for handouts." But Tommy wasn't so sure. There was something in the dog's eyes, a desperate intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "He's tryin' to tell us somethin'," he said, stepping closer. The hound stopped digging, locked eyes with Tommy, and barked again, louder, sharper, before leaping into the shallow water. He splashed toward the middle of the river, pawing at the surface, his whines mingling with the rush of the current. The other fishermen exchanged wary glances, their rods forgotten as they watched the strange scene unfold. "What's he after?" Pete asked, his tone shifting from irritation to intrigue. "Only one way to find out," Tommy replied, wading into the shallows, his boots sinking into the cold, sticky mud. The dog barked again, turning back to Tommy as if urging him to follow. The closer Tommy got, the more frantic the hound became, scratching at the water with his paws. Something glinted faintly beneath the surface, a fleeting shimmer in the sunlight that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Did y'all see that?" Jim called, his skepticism cracking as he squinted at the spot. "Yeah," Tommy said, his voice tight with unease. "Somethin's down there. Grab the nets, we gotta check this out." The fishermen hesitated, the weight of the moment settling over them like a storm cloud. Pete grabbed a long-handled net from his gear, while Jim fetched a pole, grumbling under his breath but moving all the same. The dog, sensing their shift, stopped barking and stood still, his tail wagging nervously, his amber eyes fixed on the water. "Hurry," he seemed to say with one final, sharp bark. Tommy waded deeper, the river soaking through his jeans, the cold biting at his legs. He plunged the net into the murky depths, dragging it slowly through the silt. The men watched, breaths held, as the net surfaced with a heavy splash, dripping with water and tangled weeds. Amid the muck, something metallic gleamed, a thick, rusted chain, its links crusted with grime. Tommy tugged, but it wouldn't budge, anchored to something below. "Help me out here," he shouted, his voice edged with urgency. Jim and Pete joined him, gripping the chain and pulling with all their might. The water churned violently, resisting their efforts, but the dog barked again, louder, pacing the bank as if spurring them on. With a final, straining heave, the chain gave way. And a large, heavy object broke the surface. The men stumbled back, water splashing around them as they hauled it to shore, a metal box, rectangular and battered, its edges jagged and its surface coated in moss and slime. A rusted padlock hung from its latch, barely holding it closed. "What the hell?" Jim muttered, his voice trailing off as he stared at the box. It was heavy, solid, and unmistakably deliberate, not some piece of junk swept downstream. But something someone had meant to hide. "This ain't normal," Tommy said, crouching to inspect it, his hands trembling not from the cold but from the growing dread in his gut. "Why's it chained up like this?" Pete crossed his arms, his sunburned face paling. "Folks don't chain stuff up unless they don't want it found. Maybe we should leave it be." The dog whined, low and insistent, sitting beside Tommy and tilting his head as if waiting. "You brought us here, didn't you?" Tommy murmured, scratching behind the hound's ears. He glanced at the box, then at the river, a chill creeping up his spine. "Grab the crowbar, Pete. We're opening it." "You sure about this?" Jim asked, his gruff voice tinged with unease. "Some things are buried for a reason." Tommy's grip tightened on the chain still dangling from the box. "We owe it to him," he said, nodding at the dog. "He didn't drag us out here for nothing." Pete handed over the crowbar, and Tommy wedged it under the padlock, his heart pounding as he pushed. The metal groaned, resisting for a moment before snapping apart with a loud crack. The fisherman stepped back, the air thick with tension, as Tommy lifted the lid. The box creaked open, revealing a tangle of decayed fabric and mud-caked objects inside. He reached in. Pulling out a small, delicate item, a child's sneaker, its laces frayed, its sole worn thin. The air grew heavier, the men's breaths catching as Tommy set it on the ground. "This ain't right," Jim whispered, his face draining of color. Tommy unwrapped a piece of the fabric, a torn shirt, small enough for a kid, then found a rusted locket and a waterlogged photo. The image was faded, but clear enough, a young couple and a toddler, smiling against a backdrop of trees. "This is someone's life," Tommy said, his voice barely audible. "Why's it down here?" The dog barked again, sharp and urgent, snapping them out of their trance. He stood at the river's edge, his body tense, his gaze fixed downstream. "There's more," Tommy realized. His stomach sinking. "This ain't the end of it." The fishermen turned to the river, dread washing over them like the current itself. The hound barked once more, pacing toward the water. His eyes pleading. Whatever he'd uncovered, it was only the beginning, and the truth lurking beneath the Cumberland's surface was about to change everything. Part 2, The Depths Unveiled. The Cumberland River flowed steady and silent under the fading Tennessee sun, its surface a deceptive mirror hiding the secrets stirred up by a scruffy black and tan hound. The fishermen, Tommy Reed, Jim Tanner, and Pete Walsh, stood on the muddy bank, their boots soaked and their hands still gripping the rusted chain they'd pulled from the water. Before them lay the metal box. Its lid pried open, spilling a haunting collection of relics, a child's sneaker, a torn shirt, a locket, and a faded photo of a family lost to time. The air buzzed with unease. The weight of their discovery pressing down like a storm about to break. The hound, unnamed, wild, and relentless, barked again, his amber eyes locked downstream, his body taut with purpose. Tommy knelt beside the box, his fingers tracing the edge of the photo, the faces blurred but alive with a happiness that felt out of place in this grim moment. "This wasn't an accident," he said, his voice low and shaky. "Someone hid this, chained it up, sank it deep. Why? Jim paced behind him, his grizzled face pale, his hands rubbing nervously at his beard. "We shouldn't be messin' with this, Tommy. This is trouble, big trouble. Maybe we leave it for the cops." Pete clutched the crowbar, his sunburned neck glistening with sweat despite the chill. "He's right. This ain't our business. Could be a crime scene, for all we know." But Tommy's eyes flicked to the dog, who let out another sharp bark, pacing toward the riverbank with an urgency that couldn't be ignored. "He's not done," Tommy said, standing up, his jeans dripping river water. "He's tryin' to show us somethin' else. We can't walk away now." Jim groaned, grabbing a flashlight from his tackle box. "Fine, but if this goes south, it's on you, kid." The fishermen followed the hound downstream, their boots squelching through wet grass and mud, the river's edge growing wilder with every step. The air thickened with the scent of damp earth and the distant smoke of wildfires burning miles away, a reminder of how isolated they were. The dog moved with purpose, his barks echoing over the water, pausing every few yards to glance back and ensure they were still with him. Tommy led the way, his heart pounding, a mix of dread and determination driving him forward. "What do you reckon we'll find?" Pete asked. His voice hushed, as if afraid to disturb the silence. Tommy didn't answer, his focus locked on the hound, who stopped abruptly near a thick patch of cattails jutting from the shallows. The dog sniffed the ground, then barked furiously, digging at the muddy bank with his claws. The men gathered around, their shadows stretching long and thin in the dying light. Tommy knelt beside the hound, pulling the cattails aside, and froze. Beneath the tangled roots, a second chain glinted in the mud, its links rusted but intact, disappearing into the water. "Not another one," Jim muttered, rubbing his forehead, his skepticism crumbling under the weight of what they'd already seen. "It's stuck on something," Tommy said, gripping the chain and giving it a tug. It didn't budge, anchored deep in the river's bed. "Help me pull it up." Pete and Jim exchanged reluctant glances but stepped forward, their hands wrapping around the wet, slippery links. The dog barked again, pacing the bank, his tail stiff as the men heaved. The water churned, resisting their efforts, but with a collective grunt, they yanked harder. The chain groaned, then gave way, and a second object broke the surface, a wooden chest, its edges rotted, its lid cracked open, water streaming from its sides as they hauled it onto the shore. The smell hit them first, a sour stench of decay that made them recoil, coughing into their sleeves. "Do we even want to open this?" Pete asked, his voice trembling, the crowbar hanging limp in his hand. "We have to," Tommy said, though his own hands shook as he reached for the lid. "Whatever this is, it's why he brought us here." He glanced at the hound, who sat still now, his amber eyes fixed on the chest, a low whine escaping his throat. Tommy pushed the lid open, the wood splintering under his fingers, and the men peered inside. The chest was a jumble of rot and ruin, torn fabric, shards of broken jewelry, a stack of waterlogged notebooks tied with frayed twine. But it was the small, rusted tin nestled in the corner that stopped Tommy cold. He lifted it out, his breath catching as he pried it open. Inside were bones, tiny, delicate, unmistakably human, a child's remains preserved in the river's dark embrace. "Oh my God," Jim whispered, stumbling back, his face ashen. This is..." Tommy couldn't speak, his throat tightening as he stared at the bones, his mind racing to make sense of the horror before them. The dog whined again, resting his head on Tommy's knee, his tail still for the first time all day. "This ain't no accident," Tommy finally said, his voice breaking. "Someone put this here. Someone wanted it gone." Pete paced, his hands on his head, his voice rising with panic. "We should have left it alone. We need the cops, now." Tommy nodded, closing the tin with trembling fingers and placing it back in the chest. "Yeah. Call them." Jim fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed 911, his voice a hoarse whisper as he spoke to the dispatcher. The other fishermen stood in stunned silence, their eyes darting between the chest and the hound, who sat calmly beside Tommy as if his work was done. "Good boy," Tommy murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears, his voice thick with gratitude and dread. "You've done more than we ever could have." By the time the Clarksville police arrived, the sun had dipped below the hills, casting long shadows across the riverbank. Officers swarmed the scene, their radios crackling as forensic techs in white suits unpacked gear. Yellow tape cordoned off the area, and the once tranquil fishing spot buzzed with grim purpose. Tommy, Jim, and Pete stood off to the side, answering questions from a sharp-eyed detective named Laura Gaines. The hound sat nearby, his amber eyes tracking every movement, his presence a quiet anchor amid the chaos. Detective Gaines knelt beside the wooden chest, her gloved hands lifting the notebooks, their pages swollen and stained but legible in places. She flipped through them, her brow furrowing as she read. "These date back 15 years, she said, her voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "Looks like a family, parents and a kid, went missing around here. Case went cold. No leads. Until now." Tommy felt a chill crawl up his spine. "So these boxes. Someone hid M," Gaines finished, her tone grim. "Chained M up, sank M deep. Whoever did this didn't want anyone digging up the truth." Jim shook his head, his voice barely audible. "We'd never have found M without that dog." All eyes turned to the hound, who tilted his head, his tail giving a faint wag. A forensic tech approached Gaines, holding a small, rusted tag found in the chest. "Detective, check this out," he said, handing it over. Gaines examined it, her eyes widening slightly. "This was their dog's tag," she said, glancing at the hound. "Belonged to the family's pet." Tommy frowned, confusion knotting his gut. "That can't be the same dog. This one's just a stray." Gaines shrugged, her expression softening. "Maybe not. But he's tied to this somehow. Dogs got a way of knowin' things we don't." The fishermen stood in silence as the investigation unfolded, the river's calm surface mocking the storm brewing within them. The hound had led them to a truth buried for years, a family's plea for justice, locked away in the Cumberland's depths. But as the police worked, Tommy couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The dog's eyes lingered on the river, as if he knew more secrets waited beneath the water, secrets that would demand to be heard. Part 3: Echoes of the Past. The Cumberland River lay still under a twilight sky, its waters dark and glassy as the last light bled from the Tennessee hills. The riverbank near Clarksville buzzed with the grim efficiency of a crime scene, police lights flashing, forensic techs sifting through mud, reporters hovering beyond the yellow tape. Tommy Reed, Jim Tanner, and Pete Walsh stood on the sidelines, their fishing gear abandoned, their hands still stained with river muck. Before them sat two unearthed relics, a metal box and a wooden chest, their contents, children's clothes, bones, and waterlogged journals, spilling a story of loss and concealment that chilled the air. The scruffy black and tan hound who'd started it all sat beside Tommy, his amber eyes calm but watchful, his tail giving an occasional wag as if he understood the weight of what he'd uncovered. Detective Laura Gaines stood over the wooden chest, her sharp features lit by the glow of a flashlight as she pored over the journals, their ink-smudged pages whispering a tale from 15 years past. This family, John and Mary Carver, and their 3-year-old daughter, Ellie, vanished in '08, she said, her voice steady but heavy. Reported missing after a camping trip upriver. No bodies, no suspects. Case went cold, until today. Tommy's stomach twisted, his eyes flicking to the child's sneaker resting on the ground, its laces frayed like a lifeline cut short. "So these boxes, they're proof?" Gaines nodded, her gloved hands lifting a rusted locket from the chest. Someone went to a hell of a lot of trouble to bury this. Chains, padlocks. The river's depth, it wasn't meant to be found. Jim ran a hand through his salt and pepper beard, his voice hoarse. And we wouldn't have, if that damn dog hadn't dragged us into it. All eyes turned to the hound, who tilted his head, his ears twitching as if acknowledging their stares. Pete clutched his arms, his sunburned face pale. How'd he know? He ain't their dog, can't be. That was 15 years ago. Gaines held up the rusted tag found in the chest, its faded engraving barely legible, Buddy, Carver family. This was their pup's tag, she said, glancing at the hound. Maybe he's not Buddy. But he's connected, call it instinct, call it something else. He knew where to look. Tommy knelt beside the dog, scratching behind his ears, feeling the warmth of his matted fur. You saved M, didn't you? He murmured, his voice thick with awe. The hound licked his hand, his tail wagging faintly, as if to say his job wasn't quite done. The investigation stretched into the night, the riverbank a hive of activity as techs cataloged evidence and officers traced the journal's fragmented story. The final entries were a desperate scrawl, "They're coming for us. We can't hide. If we don't make it, someone find this," a plea etched in fading ink. Gaines pieced it together, her voice cutting through the murmurs. Looks like the Carvers were running from someone with power. Last entry mentions a truck tie-in M, headlights in the dark. Then nothing. Tommy felt a chill deeper than the river's cold. So whoever did this, they sank the truth with M. Until now, Gaines said, her eyes narrowing. This dog gave us a lead we never had. We're reopening the case, homicide, not missing persons. As the fisherman answered questions, their words halting and heavy, the hound sat quietly, his gaze drifting back to the river. Tommy couldn't shake the feeling that more lay beneath the surface, more boxes, more secrets. A deeper darkness waiting to be dragged into the light. What happens to him now? He asked Gaines, nodding at the dog as the techs packed up the evidence. If he's a stray, animal control take him, she replied, shrugging. Unless someone claims him. Tommy's jaw tightened. He ain't going to no pound. He's comin' with me. Gaines smiled faintly. A rare crack in her stern facade. Good call. He's earned it. The fishermen were released as dawn crept over the hills, the riverbank quieting as the police wrapped up. Tommy lingered, watching the water, the hound, now named River, at his side. The story broke the next day, headlines screaming across Tennessee, "Stray dog leads fisherman to cold case breakthrough." News vans swarmed Clarksville, reporters digging into the Carvers' disappearance, the town buzzing with a mix of shock and pride. The hound who wouldn't stop barking became a local legend. His scruffy face splashed across screens nationwide. At Tommy's small trailer on the edge of town, River settled in, his amber eyes bright as he explored the yard, chasing shadows and sniffing the grass. Tommy leaned against the porch, a beer in hand, watching the dog with a quiet gratitude. The river stretched calm and serene in the distance, its surface hiding no more secrets, at least for now. "Good boy, River," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You did something bigger than us." River barked once, a sound free of urgency, full of contentment, then trotted over to sit at Tommy's feet. The case was alive again, investigators chasing leads from the journals, suspects long buried in the town's past, a truck driver with a rap sheet, a local official who'd vanished around the same time. The Carver's story, though tragic, had a voice now, thanks to a dog who'd refused to let it stay silent. Days turned to weeks, and the investigation deepened, unearthing whispers of a cover-up tied to old money and older grudges. Tommy followed it on the news, River always nearby, his presence a reminder of the morning that changed everything. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting gold across the Cumberland once more, Tommy sat on the porch with River curled beside him. "You knew, didn't you?" he said, scratching the hound's ears. "You felt down there, Callan, for help." River sighed, resting his head on Tommy's knee, his tail thumping softly. The river flowed on, its secrets lessened but its mysteries endless. For Tommy, Jim, and Pete, the fishing spot would never be the same, a place of peace turned to purpose. All because of a scruffy stray who'd barked until the truth broke free. And for River, it was a new beginning, a home, a name, and a legacy as the hound who gave a lost family their justice. Lesson from the story: trust and persistence can uncover truths others overlook. River, a scruffy stray, barked relentlessly until fishermen found a buried tragedy, a family's lost story hidden beneath the Cumberland River. This tale shows us that even the smallest voices, like a determined dog's, can break through silence to demand justice. It's a reminder to listen when instinct screams, because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried unless we let it. What do you think? Could a dog's instinct lead you to something life-changing? Have you ever had a pet uncover a mystery or save the day? Drop your stories in the comments, we're all ears. If River's grit and this chilling discovery hooked you, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell for more jaw-dropping tales. Tell us where you're watching from and what kind of dog-led adventure you want next. Let's keep this river of stories flowing.